On the night of my 35th wedding anniversary, I sat alone at a candlelit table, waiting for my wife to come home. The dinner was ready, the wine was poured, then my phone rang. It was my son, an FBI agent. "Dad, Mom still isn't home," he asked. "She'll be here soon." "Why?" I replied. A long silence followed. Then his voice turned cold. "Don't ask questions. Leave the house. Right now." I grabbed my keys and ran. But when I backed out of the driveway and looked in the rearview mirror, I turned cold at what I saw. Before we begin, drop a quick comment for me. What time is it where you are? Morning coffee, afternoon drive, or late night reflection? I read everyone, and your presence here truly matters. Just a quick note. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling. The heart of this story, the message is what I hope stays with you. The person I could still trust maybe was Thaddeus Greer. I called him at 6:47 Saturday morning from the prepaid phone. He answered on the second ring. "Right?" His voice was rough with sleep. "I just saw the news this morning. Oh my God." Ray, my middle name. Raymond. He was the only person who'd called me that in 20 years. "I need help," I said. "Where are you?" "Manassas. Can I come to you?" There was a pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, I heard Thaddeus Greer make the same calculation I'd made 100 times in security work. How much do I ask? And how much do I just accept? "Come now," he said. "I'll put coffee on." I drove 20 minutes to his Arlington home and arrived at 7 o'clock exactly. Thaddeus Greer was 63, retired defense systems engineer who had worked alongside me at DHS for 11 years before his knees gave out, and the government gave him a pension. He had tired eyes that had seen too many classified briefings and the particular quiet of someone who'd learned when not to ask questions. He opened the door before I knocked and pulled me inside with one hand on my elbow. "You look like hell," he said. "I've had a bad night." I saw. He gestured toward the TV in his living room. The morning news was on mute. "They're saying you were inside when it happened." "I wasn't." "I know." He looked at me for a long moment. "You want to tell me what actually happened?" "Not yet," I said. "Maybe not ever, but I need a place to think for a few hours." Thaddeus nodded. Intelligence people understand that sometimes the best help is asking nothing. He gave me clean clothes that were 2 sizes too big. He made scrambled eggs and toast that I didn't taste but ate anyway because my body needed fuel. And most critically, he showed me to his study, where an old terminal from our DHS days sat on a desk in the corner. It's still connected to secondary databases. He said, "Private VPN, not through any official channels. Don't ask how." I didn't ask how. I sat at the terminal for 2 hours and searched for things I couldn't search for on a public network. Orion project files, Powell Foundation financial records, Cora's professional history before we met. Most of it came back restricted or deleted, but I learned enough to know that whatever Cora had been planning, it was connected to work I'd walked away from 8 years ago. At 10 o'clock, Thaddeus brought me more coffee. "You planning to stay here tonight?" he asked. The question was casual, too casual. "I need to get some personal things this afternoon," I said. "Can I borrow the car?" "Of course." He handed me his keys without hesitation. "Where are you going?" "Just some errands." "Stay another night, Ray. It's dangerous out there." He said it with enthusiasm, not concern, enthusiasm. I filed that observation away and didn't let it show on my face. Thaddeus asked where I slept last night. I told him the motel name. He nodded, didn't ask further questions. But I realized and learned not to let it show. That wasn't a question from a friend who was just worried. "I'll think about it," I said. I left at 1:30 in the afternoon, driving Thaddeus's Toyota toward Falls Church. The storage shed was a habit from 30 years of security work. You keep important things outside the house. You keep them where no one expects them to be. You keep them where even the people closest to you don't know to look. I'd rented the unit 8 years ago under a shell LLC that existed only on paper. Cora didn't know about it. No one knew about it. The facility was one of those anonymous self-storage complexes off Route 7. Orange doors, numeric keypad locks, security cameras that recorded nothing because the owner was too cheap to pay for actual storage. I opened Unit 247 and stepped inside. The safe sat in the back corner under a canvas tarp. Combination lock. No electronic components. No network connection. Nothing that could be remotely accessed or traced. I dialed the combination and opened it. Inside was everything I'd put there 8 years ago. spare passport, $5,000 in cash wrapped in plastic, and an old manila folder about the Orion project, the classified surveillance network I'd consulted on before I was removed from the program under circumstances that were never fully explained. I took out the cash and the passport. Then I saw the second folder, dark blue, thicker than mine, and on the tab in handwriting that wasn't mine was a single word, Raymond, Cora's handwriting. "That's not mine," I said to the empty storage unit. "I didn't put that there," which means she did. I picked up the blue folder. It was heavy, substantial, the kind of weight that comes from years of accumulated documentation. How long had she known about the storage shed? How many times had she been here while I thought I was keeping secrets? The answer came to me a moment later, and it was humiliatingly simple. I had come here 8 years ago to set this up. I had driven here in our shared car. She had been tracking the vehicle. The storage facility's address had been in the GPS history of a car we both owned. She hadn't needed to follow me. The data had followed me for her. I closed the safe, left the unit, and drove to the shopping mall parking lot 3 blocks away. I didn't want to open the folder in the shed. If Cora knew about the location, she might have installed surveillance. She might be watching even now. But the parking lot was public, anonymous, safe. I parked in the back row facing the empty spaces and turned off the engine. The blue folder sat on the passenger seat beside me. I looked at it for a while before opening it. The tab said Raymond in Cora's precise, controlled handwriting. The folder itself was worn at the edges like it had been opened and closed many times. There are things that, once you know, you can't help but know. I picked up the folder. My hands were steady. That surprised me. After everything that had happened in the last 18 hours, the house, the fire, the motel, Thaddeus's slightly wrong enthusiasm, my hands were completely steady. Maybe because I'd already accepted that whatever was inside this folder would be worse than anything I'd imagined. Maybe because acceptance is just another word for surrender. I opened it. Inside, Cora's folder was a single word, printed in capital letters across the first page, Orion. I read for 3 hours in that parking lot. Then I drove until I couldn't drive anymore and slept in the car with the folder on my chest. I woke up in my car at 8:15 Sunday morning with a stiff neck and a dry mouth. The blue folder was still there. I'd hoped for a moment, that brief irrational moment between sleep and consciousness that I'd imagined it. But no. Real. I needed answers, not the ones Cora had written in careful clinical notes. Real answers, independent verification. Falls Church Public Library opened at 9 o'clock Sunday morning. I was waiting in the parking lot at 8:50 watching families arrive for weekend story hour. Normal people, normal lives, the kind of normal I'd had 24 hours ago and would probably never have again. The moment the doors unlocked, I walked to the computer section in the back. Public terminals, no login required, anonymous browsing. Exactly what I needed. I started with the forums where former DHS employees traded war stories and occasionally leaked information they shouldn't. Encrypted boards, password-protected channels. I still knew the back doors. Then archived government contracts, public procurement records, Freedom of Information Act requests that had been filed and partially fulfilled. The picture unfolded piece by piece. Orion network, biometric data collection via compromised federal authentication portals. Estimated value $15 to $20 million. Buyer Eastern European Financial Consortium with ties to identity theft operations across 14 countries. I clicked through technical specifications, authentication protocols, system architecture diagrams, and then I saw it, the framework, my framework. The 1994 original design I'd built for the federal security agencies that would later be consolidated into Homeland Security after 2003. The legacy authentication system that was supposed to be decommissioned 8 years ago but never fully removed because government IT moves slower than bureaucracy, and bureaucracy moves slower than geology. That's my architecture, I said to the empty library terminal. She built this entire operation on systems I designed. 30 years of careful work, clean systems, secure protocols, every line of code written with the assumption that the people using it would be trustworthy. And Cora had turned it into a weapon. I stopped reading for a moment and looked at my hands on the library keyboard. These hands had designed those systems. Clean hands, careful hands, and she had turned them into weapons. I kept reading. The Orion network wasn't just collecting data. It was harvesting biometric profiles from active federal databases that still used my legacy authentication. fingerprints, retinal scans, voice signatures, the kind of high-value identity markers that could be sold to the highest bidder and used to bypass security systems I'd spent my career building. 2,400 American citizens, mostly former government officials, people with clearance, people whose biometric profiles were worth more than ordinary citizens because they had access to places and systems that ordinary citizens couldn't reach. The list was alphabetical. I scrolled down slowly, reading names I didn't recognize. Anderson, Baker, Chen. No, wait, I'd misread. Chandler. The names blurred together into a catalog of people whose lives Cora had commodified. Davis, Elliott, Fisher. How many of these 2,400 people knew their biometric data was for sale? How many had families who thought they were safe because someone like me had built the security? I kept scrolling. Grayson, Harrison, Irving. My hands were steady on the mouse. That surprised me again. After everything I'd learned in the last 48 hours, my hands were still steady. Maybe because I'd moved past shock into something colder, something that felt like the professional detachment I'd used in security work for 3 decades. Assess the threat, understand the scope, plan the response. Jones, Klein, Lopez. I scrolled past the M names, Mitchell, Morrison, Murphy. Then the P section, Palmer, Patterson, Phillips. Powell. I stopped. Powell Brock, FBI counterintelligence, biometric profile comprehensive, voice authentication, retinal scan, fingerprints on file from federal employment background check. Powell Dennis, former DHS, biometric profile comprehensive, all markers current in federal database despite retirement status. I stared at the screen, both of us, father and son, not just on the list, targeted. Cora hadn't just been selling stolen identities, she'd been selling us, or planning to. The transaction date listed beside our names was November 8th, 3 days from now. The sale hadn't completed yet, which meant Brock had known. He must have known. FBI counterintelligence doesn't miss something like this. He'd seen his own name on the list. Seen mine. And instead of telling me, instead of warning me earlier, he'd waited. A librarian at the next desk looked over. I smiled apologetically and turned back to the monitor. Brock had called me Friday night not because he'd just discovered the threat. He'd called me because the timeline had accelerated. Something had changed. Maybe Cora had moved up the sale date. Maybe she'd decided the house fire couldn't wait. Maybe she'd realized that Brock was getting too close. I looked at Brock's name on the list and understood why he hadn't called me sooner. Not because he didn't trust me, but because he was trying to protect me from this truth until he had enough evidence to do it without breaking me first. My good foolish son, who had no idea that while he was protecting me, our mother was planning to eliminate us both. I closed the browser and cleared the history. Then I sat very still in the Falls Church Public Library and made 3 decisions. First, I needed to find Brock, not call, find face to face, because phones were compromised and trust required proximity. Second, I needed to stop the November 8th sale, 5 days. That gave me 5 days to dismantle a network built on 30 years of my own architecture. Third, I needed to understand why Cora had kept me alive this long, because if she wanted me dead since Friday, I should already be dead, which meant she needed something from me first. The question was what? I arrived at Tyson's Corner at 11:45 Monday night and waited in the car until the dashboard clock showed midnight. Midnight. Only a few cars belonging to night shift staff were left in the B1 underground parking garage. I found Cora's black Mercedes in 4 minutes. I knew the license plate number like I knew my own phone number. HAR 2847. Virginia plates. The car was registered under joint ownership. Both our names on the title. That made accessing it legal. I used the spare key I'd kept on my keyring for 12 years. The one I'd grabbed from the hook by the door, the same moment I grabbed my car keys on Friday night, without thinking, purely by habit. The door opened without protest. I had every right to be here. The interior smelled like her perfume and leather. I had sat in this passenger seat 1,000 times over the years. Anniversary dinners, weekend trips, normal life. I opened the glove compartment. Inside was exactly what I expected. Registration, insurance card, owner's manual. And beneath those, wrapped in a soft cloth, a small black remote control. I picked it up carefully. The remote was compact, professional, the kind of device that could be purchased legally if you knew which suppliers to ask and which questions not to answer. Cora had kept this habit for 35 years. Important things in the glove compartment, easy to reach, easy to grab in an emergency. I knew her patterns because I'd spent 3.5 decades watching her build them. From my jacket pocket, I pulled out the device I'd assembled over the last 3 days, purchased components, legal sources, nothing that would raise flags if anyone checked receipts. It looked identical to Cora's remote on the outside, same size, same weight, same texture. But inside, instead of whatever destructive capability Cora had installed, mine contained a GPS transmitter. Commercial grade. The kind used for tracking vehicles or high-value shipments. When activated, it would send a precise location signal to a server I'd programmed using credentials from my old DHS days. A server that still existed, that still accepted authentication from accounts that were supposed to be decommissioned, but never actually were. A server that could forward location data to law enforcement if the right protocols were triggered. I placed my device in the glove compartment where Cora's had been, wrapped it in the same soft cloth, positioned it exactly as she'd left the original. She'll take the device and believe it's her weapon, I said quietly to the empty car. I'll let her believe that until the moment it matters. I put Cora's real remote in my jacket pocket, locked the car. The door closed with a satisfying click. I stepped out of the Mercedes and stood for a moment in the underground garage. The fluorescent lights hummed at low power, casting everything in pale yellow. No movement, no other cars running. Just the distant sound of building HVAC somewhere above me. I checked my watch, 12:17. I pressed the elevator button to B2. In my jacket pocket was the real remote control Cora's weapon. In her glove compartment was my trap. She wouldn't know the difference until it was too late. The elevator descended 2 levels below ground. When the doors opened, I was looking at a service corridor. No reception desk, no security guard. Just a steel door and a numeric keypad. I typed 14 characters I hadn't typed in 8 years. Legacy maintenance credential, original subsystem. The kind of access that existed in databases no one remembered to check when employees left or systems were upgraded. No one had put it into offboarding protocols because no one knew it still existed. The light turned green. I pulled the door open and stepped inside. The hallway beyond was exactly as I'd calculated. Concrete floors, fluorescent lights on motion sensors that flickered to life as I moved, security cameras in corners sweeping on predictable cycles. 4-second scan, stop, rotate, scan the next section. I'd designed similar systems for years, not this exact one, but the architecture was the same, the logic was the same, the blind spots were the same. I moved through the hallways according to the camera cycles, 4 seconds per sweep. Blind spot in the corner where the camera angle couldn't quite reach. Move when the camera finished its rotation and started back. No equipment needed, just timing, just knowledge of how these systems thought. Because I'd taught them how to think. I reached the stairwell at 12:24, climbed 6 floors in silence. My footsteps echoed in the concrete shaft, but there was no one to hear them at this hour. Every step could go wrong. Every camera sweep could catch an angle I'd miscalculated. I didn't let that possibility take over. I just kept moving. Floor 6 was dark. The hallway stretched out in both directions empty. No security personnel, no cleaning crew, just motion sensor lights that turned on as I stepped into their range. I counted doors, 3rd on the left, exactly where the floor plan I'd reconstructed from memory said it would be. The door had a biometric lock, facial recognition, modern, expensive. I looked at it for a moment and recognized the model, 2019 version. The upgrade from the 2017 system that had too many false negatives in low-light conditions. I'd coded the 2018 prototype that this was based on, worked with the team that refined the algorithms, taught the system how to map facial features in 3 dimensions so it could recognize people from multiple angles. I stood in front of the scanner and looked directly into the camera. The facial recognition system looked at me for 1.2 seconds. I counted in my head. Mapping, processing, comparing against database. Then the green light came on. It recognized me. Of course it recognized me. I had taught it how to look at people. The door lock disengaged with a soft click. I pushed it open and stepped into the room beyond. The server room was small, not on any official floor plan I'd seen, just 12 feet by 12 feet with equipment racks along 3 walls and a single workstation in the center. The servers hummed with the particular sound of machines processing data they weren't supposed to be processing. I sat down at the workstation and turned on the monitor. The login screen appeared. Standard corporate interface. Username and password required. I typed the same legacy credential I'd used downstairs. Green light, access granted. The system opened and I started looking through files. What I found in the first 30 seconds told me everything I needed to know about what Cora had been doing for the last decade. What I found in the next 30 seconds told me why she'd needed to make me disappear. And what I found 60 seconds after that told me exactly where my son was. Cora's next move came immediately. She turned away from us and walked toward the wall scanner mounted beside the emergency exit. She walked to it like she'd done it 1,000 times before, confident, controlled. The woman who'd built this entire surveillance infrastructure from the ground up. She placed her hand on the biometric scanner. The sensor activated. Blue light swept across her palm, reading the unique pattern of ridges and whorls that identified her as Cora Powell, administrator, creator. The woman who controlled every lock, every camera, every door in this building. The light turned red. Access denied. Cora pulled her hand back, looked at the scanner, placed her hand on it again. Blue light, scanning, reading. Red light, access denied. What is this? Cora said. Not to us, to herself, to the machine that should have recognized her. She tried a third time. Same blue light, same red denial. I removed you from the system an hour ago, I said. Cora turned to face me. Her expression was something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not fear, complete incomprehension. You couldn't have, she said. I built this. My credentials are hard-coded into the primary database. They can't be deleted without administrative override. I know, I said. That's why I knew where to find your admin credentials, and why I knew exactly which commands to enter to replace your biometric profile with an empty authorization record. Cora stared at me. When she asked, 1:30 a.m., I said, in the server room on floor 6, while I was copying the surveillance files. It took 90 seconds. She looked at the scanner, at her hand, at me. You erased me, she said quietly. I made you invisible, I said. To the system you created, to the surveillance network you used to watch me for 35 years. I made it so that when you try to use your empire, it doesn't recognize you anymore. Cora's face went pale, not from fear, from understanding. She realized what I'd done wasn't just tactical, it was symbolic. I'd taken the tool she'd used to control me and made her powerless within it. 35 years of watching, and in 90 seconds, I'd made her invisible. The FBI will be here in seconds, Brock said. His voice was calm, professional. The FBI agent, not the son. And when they arrive, they'll find you locked out of your own system. Cora looked at him, then at me, then back at the scanner that no longer knew who she was. You're good, she said finally. Better than I gave you credit for. I learned from the best, I said. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Then her expression hardened. Calculation returned to her eyes. The system doesn't recognize me, she said, but it doesn't recognize you either. Legacy credentials give you access. They don't give you control. You can get in, but you can't lock me out. I already did, I said. No, Cora said. You deleted my biometric profile, but my backup credentials still exist. Voice authentication, retinal scan, fingerprint on the secondary server. I have 3 more ways into this system, and you don't know where any of them are. She was right. I'd removed her primary access. But a system like Orion would have redundancies, backups, multiple entry points for the administrator. I'd slowed her down, but I hadn't stopped her. Doesn't matter, Brock said. The FBI is already here. As if on cue, we heard voices from the stairwell, heavy footsteps, multiple people. Cora heard them too. For the first time since 1989, my wife looked powerless. Not defeated, not broken, but powerless. Standing in the hallway of a building she owned, locked out of a system she'd designed, waiting for federal agents to arrive and arrest her for crimes she'd recorded herself committing. 35 years, she said quietly. I spent 35 years building this, and you destroyed it in 4 days. I didn't destroy it, I said. You did. The moment you decided to record yourself discussing murder. The moment you kept surveillance tapes that incriminated you. The moment you thought you were too smart to get caught. I was too smart, Cora said, until I married someone smarter. The voices in the stairwell were closer, maybe 10 seconds away. Cora looked at the emergency exit, at the scanner that wouldn't recognize her, at the hallway that led to elevators she could no longer control. Then she looked at her hand, at the palm that the system had rejected 3 times. And then she looked at me. Her expression changed. Not calculation this time, decision. If I can't win, she said, then neither can you. She moved. Not toward the scanner, not toward the exit, toward the red manual fire alarm box mounted beside the elevator. Manual, not electronic, not controlled by the biometric system, just a physical alarm that anyone could activate by breaking the glass. I understood immediately. The fire alarm would bring building security from the ground floor, private security who worked for the Powell Foundation, who were loyal to Cora, who would arrive before the FBI finished climbing 7 flights of stairs, who would complicate everything. I lunged forward. Cora's hand was already moving toward the glass panel, her fist pulled back. I was 3 feet away when her fist hit the glass. The panel shattered, the alarm activated. A piercing mechanical shriek filled the hallway, and Cora pulled the manual alarm lever down. The building's fire suppression system engaged. Lights began flashing, the elevator doors locked, and somewhere on the ground floor, building security started running toward the stairs. Cora looked at me through the chaos, through the alarm, through the flashing lights, and she smiled. "Now we see who they believe," she said. "The woman who owns the building, or the man who broke into it." The stairwell door burst open. Federal agents in tactical gear poured into the hallway. And behind me, I heard different footsteps, different voices, building security arriving from the opposite stairwell. We were surrounded. FBI agents filled the hallway from one end. Building security filled it from the other. And in the middle stood me, Brock, and Cora, with a fire alarm screaming overhead. The alarm was still screaming when Cora pulled the remote from her pocket. The same remote she'd retrieved from her glove compartment. The same one she'd carried as her final insurance. Her last line of defense. She held it up so everyone could see it. "What does that do?" one of the agents asked. "This building is wired," Cora said. Her voice cut through the alarm with absolute clarity. "One button and the evidence is destroyed. All of it, unrecoverable." The FBI agents stopped moving. So did building security. Everyone looked at the small black device in Cora's hand. Except me. I looked at Cora's face, at the expression of someone playing their final card. "You lose Dennis," she said to me. "Press it," I replied. Cora's finger hovered over the button. "What?" she said. "Press the button," I repeated. "Go ahead. Destroy your evidence. Make yourself look guilty to everyone in this hallway. I'll wait." Cora's eyes narrowed, calculating, trying to understand what I knew that she didn't. Then she smiled. "You're bluffing," she said. "You wouldn't risk—" She pressed the button. Nothing happened. No explosion, no fire, no system lockdown, no sound except the fire alarm still shrieking overhead. Cora looked at the remote, pressed the button again. And again. Nothing. "I don't understand," she said quietly. One of the FBI agents stepped forward. Not one I recognized. A woman, professional, carrying herself with the particular authority of someone in charge. She pulled out her phone. The screen showed a map, and on that map, a blinking red dot. Exactly where we were standing. "GPS transmitter," the woman said. "Broadcasting on frequency 1575.42 megahertz. We've been tracking it for the last 90 seconds. Thank you for activating it." She looked at me, then at Cora. "Special Agent Rosalba Yates," she said. "FBI Counterintelligence. We have a warrant for this location based on evidence provided by FBI Agent Brock Powell and corroborated testimony from Thaddeus Greer." She held up a document, official, signed, time-stamped. Warrant was signed at 2:00 a.m. Rosalba continued. 40 minutes ago, before you triggered that fire alarm, before you pressed that button, we were already legally authorized to be here." Cora stared at the remote in her hand, then at Rosalba's phone showing the GPS signal, then at me. "You swapped it," she said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "Yes," I said. "When—" I didn't answer immediately. Let her think about it. Let her retrace the last 4 days. Every moment she'd had possession of that remote. Every time she'd checked on it. Every opportunity I'd had to access her vehicle. "Midnight," I said finally. "Friday night, in your Mercedes, while you were inside the house checking the lobby cameras before you left for the facility." Cora's face went pale. "The fire," she said. "You were supposed to be in the house." "I was in your car," I said. "Swapping the remote you thought would give you leverage for the GPS transmitter that would give the FBI your exact location. You checked the glove compartment Saturday morning. You felt the weight. You saw the device. But you never tested it. You just assumed it was what you'd put there originally. Nothing happened. No explosion, no fire, no system lockdown. Just Cora Powell standing in a hallway, holding a piece of plastic that had betrayed her the moment she trusted it. Rosalba moved forward. 2 other agents followed. Cora Powell. Rosalba said, "You're under arrest for corporate espionage, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." She produced handcuffs, standard issue, metal. The sound they made when they clicked was the loudest thing in the hallway besides the alarm. Cora held out her wrists. Not fighting, not resisting, just accepting. Rosalba placed the cuffs carefully, professionally. The way you handcuff someone you've been investigating for 18 months, someone whose arrest you've planned down to the minute. "When did you know?" Cora asked me while Rosalba secured the cuffs. "About Orion," I said. "Sunday, about you." I paused. "I think I always knew. I just didn't want to see it." Cora nodded slowly. "When?" she asked again. But this time she was looking at the remote, the device she still held in her now handcuffed hands. "Midnight," I said. "Friday, you were watching the lobby cameras, making sure the building was clear before you left. 10 minutes with your eyes on screens, 10 minutes when you weren't watching the driveway. That's all I needed." 35 years of surveillance, and she never saw me coming. Cora looked at the remote, at the GPS transmitter disguised as her insurance policy, at the proof that during her one brief moment of distraction, I'd turned her own weapon against her. "I underestimated you," she said. "You assumed I was the person you wanted me to be," I replied. "Comfortable, trusting, blind. You spent 35 years watching me, but you were only seeing what you expected to see." Rosalba began reading Miranda rights. The words were familiar, automatic. The same script recited at every arrest. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Cora wasn't listening to Rosalba. She was looking at me, her eyes locked on mine. And for the first time in maybe decades, I saw something in them that wasn't calculation or control or contempt. Recognition. Not recognition of my face, not recognition of 35 years of marriage. Recognition of someone she'd never actually known. The man she'd married, the man she'd surveilled, the man she'd tried to kill. He'd been a character in a story she was telling herself, a role I'd played because I hadn't known there was a script. But the person standing in front of her, now the one who'd infiltrated her facility, copied her files, swapped her weapons, and turned her own surveillance network against her, that person was a stranger, someone she'd spent 3.5 decades living with and had never actually met. "I don't know you," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "You don't." Rosalba escorted Cora to the elevator. 2 agents flanked her. The handcuffs gleamed under the hallway lights. Cora didn't look back. The second team knocked on Clarice Kelly's door at exactly 2:47 a.m. Clarice Kelly was 55 years old, corporate attorney who'd handled Cora's financial arrangements for the Powell Foundation for a decade. She answered the door in a business suit at 2:47 in the morning, as if she'd been expecting this knock for years, which, according to what Rosalba told me later, she probably had been. "I assume you have a warrant," Clarice said, before the agents could identify themselves. They showed her the paperwork: federal warrant, financial crimes, conspiracy, the same charges Cora was facing. Clarice read it carefully, professionally, like someone reviewing a contract. "Who's handling the plea agreements?" she asked. The lead agent blinked. Most people didn't ask about plea deals before they'd been formally arrested. "That's Special Agent Rosalba Yates," he said. "She's at the Tyson's facility now." "Call her," Clarice said. "Tell her I'm ready to cooperate. Full disclosure. Everything I know about Orion, about the financial structure, about Cora Powell's operation, in exchange for immunity." The agent made the call. Rosalba answered on the second ring. She was still standing in the hallway with me and Brock, watching Cora disappear into the elevator. "Its subject is requesting counsel and cooperation terms," the agent said over the phone. Rosalba looked at me, raised an eyebrow. I shrugged. "Beats, put her on," Rosalba said. Clarice took the phone. "I kept copies of everything," she said, without preamble. 35 years of everything. Financial records, communications, meeting minutes. Cora didn't trust digital storage. I was her backup, her insurance, which means I'm now your evidence. Rosalba's expression didn't change, but I saw her hand tighten on the phone. "We'll send a team," Rosalba said. "Don't touch anything. We'll be there in 20 minutes. "I'll put coffee on," Clarice said and hung up. I learned about Clarice's arrest 3 hours later, sitting in an FBI conference room, drinking terrible coffee. Not arrested exactly, detained, cooperating, trading 35 years of carefully maintained records for immunity from prosecution. Clarice Kelly had seen which way the wind was blowing and adjusted her sails before the storm hit. Smart, pragmatic, exactly the kind of attorney Cora would have hired, and exactly the kind of witness who would destroy any defense Cora tried to mount. At 3:30 a.m., Rosalba released me and Brock. "Preliminary statement is sufficient for now," she said. "But I need you both back here at 9 o'clock for formal testimony. Bring your encrypted drive. We'll need to authenticate the evidence." "Are we under arrest?" I asked. "No," Rosalba said. "You're cooperating witnesses. Agent Powell's status gives him protection, and you—" She looked at me. "You were a victim of a 35-year surveillance operation. Breaking into the facility where you were being monitored doesn't rise to the level of criminal trespass under these circumstances." "But I did break in," I said. "You used legacy credentials you legitimately possessed from your time at DHS," Rosalba said. "And you accessed a facility that was actively being used to commit federal crimes against you. Any prosecutor who tried to charge you would get laughed out of court." She handed me a business card. 9 o'clock, she repeated. "Don't be late." Brock and I walked out of the building into the parking lot. The November air was cold, sharp, clean. I breathed it in and felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not victory. Just the absence of pressure that had been there so long I'd stopped noticing it. Brock stood beside me, silent, exhausted. "I should have told you months ago," he said finally. "You told me when you were ready," I replied. "I was trying to protect you." "I know. I thought if I waited until I had enough evidence, you wouldn't have to feel like I was choosing sides, like I was betraying Mom. How do you thank someone for choosing justice when justice destroys their own mother?" "You chose what was right," I said. "That's not betrayal, that's courage." Brock nodded. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dry. But I could see the cost of what he'd done written in every line of his face. "Dad," he said. I recorded everything she said to me in that room. 3 days of conversations. She told me things about you, about what she'd planned, about how long she'd been planning it. He stopped, swallowed. "I need you to know," he continued. "Everything I did, the recordings, the evidence calling you Friday night, I wasn't trying to save the world. I was trying to save you." "I know," I said. Across the parking lot, I saw a figure standing alone. Thaddeus, watching us, waiting. I caught his eye. He looked back. I nodded once. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness, not condemnation. Just recognition that we'd both done what we had to do to protect the people we loved. Thaddeus nodded back. Then he turned and walked to his car. "Let's go home," I said to Brock. "Where's home?" Brock asked. "The house is gone. The apartment is probably being processed as a crime scene." "Motel," I said. "Same one I stayed at Sunday. 2 rooms. We sleep for 4 hours. Then we come back and tell the FBI everything." Brock drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the dark highway roll past. In 6 hours, we'd be back in that FBI conference room, giving formal statements, making everything official. The evidence on the encrypted drive would be authenticated. Clarice's records would be cross-referenced. Brock's recordings would be transcribed. And somewhere in that process, someone would ask me exactly how I'd accessed the Tysons' facility. Exactly which systems I'd compromised. Exactly what I'd done during those 2 hours between midnight and 2 a.m. I could tell them the truth, that I'd used legacy credentials that should have been revoked, that I'd exploited security gaps I'd helped design, that I'd broken into my wife's building without authorization. Or I could tell them the version Rosalba had already accepted, that I was a victim exercising reasonable self-defense against an ongoing criminal conspiracy. Both versions were true. The question was which truth would serve justice better. I closed my eyes as Brock pulled onto the highway. In 6 hours, they'd return to give formal statements. In 6 hours, the story would become official record, but which version would they tell? I didn't know yet, but I had 4 hours to sleep and 2 hours to decide. I didn't sleep. I lay on a motel bed for 4 hours staring at the ceiling, and then I got up and made my decision. I would tell them the truth, all of it, and let them decide what to do with it. The FBI field office smelled like burnt coffee and fluorescent lighting. I arrived at 8:55 Tuesday morning. Brock was already there sitting in the waiting area with 2 cups of coffee from the vending machine. He handed me one without speaking. We drank terrible coffee and waited. At 9 o'clock exactly, Rosalba Yates came out to meet us. "Agent Powell," she said to Brock. "Interview room 3. Agent Morrison will take your statement." Then she looked at me. "Mr. Powell, with me, please." I followed her down a hallway that looked exactly like every government hallway I'd walked down in 30 years of security work. Beige walls, worn carpet, the particular smell of institutions that never quite air out. She led me to a small interview room. Table, 3 chairs, recording equipment in the corner. "Have a seat," Rosalba said. "This is being recorded for evidentiary purposes. You're not under arrest. You're not a suspect. You're a cooperating witness. Do you understand?" Yes, I said. "Good." She sat across from me, opened a notebook. "Walk me through how you accessed the Tyson's facility Sunday night." I told her everything. The legacy credentials, the orphaned accounts and decommissioned authentication servers that no one remembered to revoke when systems were upgraded. The camera blind spots I knew existed because I'd designed similar systems for years and understood their limitations. The car I'd accessed legally because it was registered in both our names. The remote I'd swapped because I had every right to handle property I jointly owned. "I used credentials from a decommissioned authentication server," I said. "Technically orphaned, not stolen. They were never revoked because the revocation would have required acknowledging the old system still existed." Rosalba made notes. Her expression didn't change. "And the camera blind spots?" she asked. "Institutional knowledge," I said. "Not equipment. I didn't bring tools. I didn't hack anything. I just knew where the cameras couldn't see because I'd worked with similar layouts for 3 decades. The encrypted drive you brought us contains evidence obtained during that entry," Rosalba said. "Yes," I said. "Mr. Powell," Rosalba said. She put down her pen, looked at me directly. "You're not under investigation. You're a cooperating witness. Everything you did that night falls within legal parameters for someone defending themselves against an ongoing criminal conspiracy." I felt something loosen in my chest. "We've known about your wife since March 2023, Rosalba said. I stared at her. 18 months, I said. "You've been investigating her for 18 months. "Anonymous tips," Rosalba said. "Financial irregularities, suspicious procurement contracts through the Powell Foundation. We opened a preliminary investigation. And then your son came to us 6 months ago with evidence of a larger operation." Brock," I said. "Agent Powell provided us with financial records, communication logs, and testimony about his mother's activities," Rosalba said. "We've been building a case ever since, waiting for enough evidence to move forward." She opened another folder. "Everything you did Sunday night," she said, "matched a legal framework we'd already constructed. The legacy credentials, the joint ownership of the vehicle, the self-defense justification. It was almost like someone had been guiding you to do exactly what we needed you to do." I thought about Brock, about 6 months of gathering evidence, about Friday night's phone call telling me to run. "My son," I said. "Your son has been protecting you while simultaneously building a federal case against his mother," Rosalba said. "It's the kind of operational discipline I've rarely seen, even from experienced agents." "He learned from watching her," I said quietly. Rosalba nodded. "We noticed." "How long had the FBI been watching us watch each other?" Rosalba pulled out a third folder. "The evidence you provided," she said. "The surveillance recordings from the server room, Brock's recordings from his detention, Clarice Kelly's financial documents. All of it is admissible. All of it is substantial." "Your wife assumed your entry was illegal," Rosalba said. "It doesn't matter. The warrant we obtained at 2 a.m. covered this location independently of your entry, and everything you recovered was then cross-verified against Clarice Kelly's records, a completely separate source that had nothing to do with you being in that building. Under the independent source doctrine, the court doesn't need to rely on your access at all. The evidence stands on its own. And all of it points to something bigger than corporate espionage." She slid a document across the table, a list of names, 2,400 of them. "Orion wasn't just stealing identity data," Rosalba said. "It was targeting classified clearance employees across 7 defense contractors, engineers, analysts, program managers, people with access to sensitive national security information." I scanned the list, recognized some names, former colleagues, people I'd worked with years ago at DHS. "Yet this is a national security case," I said. "Yes," Rosalba confirmed, "which is why we've been moving carefully, why we needed ironclad evidence, Why your infiltration and the evidence you recovered were critical to our timeline. She closed the folder. You didn't just expose your wife's crimes, Rosalba said. You protected 2,400 American citizens from having their identities sold to hostile actors. I looked at the closed folder, at the list of names I couldn't see but knew were there. I did it for Brock, I said. Rosalba smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her smile. It was small, professional, but genuine. I know, she said, but that doesn't make the rest of it less true. She stood up. The interview was over. We'll need you available for testimony when this goes to trial, she said. But for now, you're free to go. No charges, no restrictions. You did good work, Mr. Powell. I started to stand. One more thing you should know, Rosalba said. She slid another folder across the table, thinner than the others, older. I opened it. Inside was a photograph, black and white, dated 1987, 2 years before I met Cora. The photo showed a young woman, 21, maybe 22, shaking hands with a man in a suit. The woman was Cora, younger, different hairstyle, but unmistakably her. The man was someone I didn't recognize, 50 years old in the photo, professional, the kind of person who looked comfortable in government buildings. Who is this? I asked. We don't know yet, Rosalba said. The photo was in Clarice Kelly's files, labeled Project Genesis 1987. We're working on identification. I stared at the photograph, at my wife shaking hands with a stranger 2 years before we met. Now, what was Project Genesis? I asked. We're still investigating, Rosalba said. But based on what we've found so far, we think Orion wasn't Cora's first surveillance operation. We think it might not even have been her idea. The photograph haunted me for weeks. The stranger shaking hands with a young woman who would become my wife. Project Genesis, 1987. A surveillance operation that predated everything I thought I knew. But first, there were more immediate concerns. 4 weeks after that night, early December, there was one place I needed to go before the grand jury convened. I drove to McLean. The lot where our house had stood was empty now. The fire department had cleared the debris. The foundation company had demolished what remained. All that was left was the concrete foundation and grass growing through the ashes. I parked on the street and walked to what used to be our front yard. 35 years in this spot. 35 years of dinners and arguments and quiet mornings and surveillance I didn't know existed. I stood there for a while, just looking. That's when Brock's car pulled up. He got out and walked over, stood beside me without speaking. I knew you'd be here, he said finally. That 35 years in this spot, I replied. We looked at the foundation together, father and son, standing on the ruins of a life that had never been what either of us thought it was. Grass doesn't care about foundations. It grows through everything we thought was permanent. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding ring. I'd taken it off the day after Cora's arrest. Couldn't wear it anymore. Couldn't throw it away either. So, it had been living in my jacket pocket for 6 weeks. A piece of gold that meant everything and nothing. I knelt down and placed it on the concrete foundation, right where the dining room used to be, where we'd had our last anniversary dinner that never happened. Brock watched without commenting. Do you regret it? He asked after I stood up. I thought about that question. Really thought about it. Did I regret the marriage? The surveillance? The 35 years of being watched? Did I regret falling in love with someone who'd apparently been assigned to me as part of a surveillance operation that started before we met? I regret using trust as a shield to blind myself for too long, I said. I regret not asking questions when things didn't add up. I regret letting comfort substitute for truth. But the marriage itself, Brock pressed. I looked at my son, 34 years old, FBI agent, the person who'd saved my life by calling me Friday night, the person who'd spent 6 months building a case against his own mother, the person who existed because Cora and I had created him. I can't regret all of it, I said, because if I regret the marriage, I regret you, and I don't regret you. Brock's jaw tightened. He looked away, not crying, just processing. Even knowing what she did, he asked. What she was even knowing, I said. You're the only part of those 35 years I can't regret. Everything else is negotiable. You're not. We stood there for another minute. Then Brock put his hand on my shoulder. Let's go, he said. We walked back to the cars. I didn't look back at the foundation, didn't look at the ring I'd left there, just kept walking forward. Brock drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched McLean disappear in the side mirror. What happens to us now? Brock asked. It was the question I'd been avoiding for 6 weeks, the question that didn't have a good answer, The foundation was gone, Cora was gone, the surveillance was gone. The structure that had defined our lives for decades had been dismantled in 4 days, and neither of us knew who we were without it. "I don't know," I said honestly. Brock nodded. It was the answer he had expected. Maybe the only honest answer either of us had anymore. "We figure it out," he said finally. "One day at a time, until it makes sense again." "And if it never makes sense?" I asked. "Then we figure that out too," Brock said. We drove in silence, father and son, rebuilding something from nothing, learning who we were when no one was watching. 2 weeks later, I sat outside a grand jury room, wearing a tie I hadn't touched in 3 years. Brock sat beside me in a suit I'd never seen him wear, professional, federal, the uniform of someone who'd chosen justice over family and was still processing the cost. We'd been waiting for 90 minutes. The hallway of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia was exactly as institutional as you'd expect. Marble floors, high ceilings, the particular echo that government buildings have when they're designed to make you feel small. How long do these usually take?" I asked. "As long as they take," Brock said. He'd been to grand jury proceedings before. I hadn't. At 11:30, the door opened. A government attorney emerged, young, competent, carrying the expression of someone who just won something important. "The grand jury returned indictments on all 17 counts," she said. Brock nodded. He'd expected this. "Did she take the plea?" he asked. The attorney shook her head. "Defense rejected all offers. They're proceeding to trial." I looked at Brock. He looked back at me. "Margaret Calloway never admits she's wrong," I said. It was the first time I'd used that name in 35 years. Cora's original name. The name she'd had before we met. Before she became Cora Powell and built a life that was apparently just the continuation of someone else's plan. Brock's expression didn't change, but I saw him register the shift, the distance I'd just created between the woman I'd married and the person being prosecuted. "No," he agreed quietly. "She doesn't." The attorney handed us paperwork, trial dates, witness schedules, the administrative debris of justice. The prosecution built 17 counts from 35 years of marriage. We left the courthouse at noon, drove in silence, went our separate ways. Brock had work. I had nothing, no wife, no home, no daily routine that didn't involve testifying or depositions or lawyers asking me to remember exact dates and times from a life I was trying to forget. Learning who I was without surveillance turned out to be simpler than I'd expected. I was just me, the same person I'd always been, minus the weight of being watched. I was making coffee when the verdict came through on the afternoon news. January 2025, 2 months after the arrest. I'd moved into a small apartment in Alexandria, 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 1 person, a balcony overlooking a parking lot. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No cameras, no microphones, no 35 years of surveillance disguised as marriage. The coffee maker gurgled. I poured a cup and carried it to the living room where the television was on with the sound low. Then I heard the anchor say a name I knew. Breaking news from the federal courthouse in Alexandria. Margaret Cora Powell was found guilty on all 17 counts in what prosecutors are calling one of the largest corporate espionage cases in Virginia history. I sat down on the couch, held my coffee cup, watched the screen. The anchor was professional, polished, reading from a teleprompter with the appropriate gravity for someone announcing the destruction of a life. Powell was convicted of conspiracy, computer fraud, wire fraud, and attempted murder. The trial, which concluded in just 3 weeks at the Eastern District of Virginia, a court known for moving federal cases faster than any other in the country, relied heavily on testimony from corporate attorney Clarice Kelly and audio recordings provided by FBI agent Brock Powell, the defendant's son. My coffee was getting cold. I didn't drink it. In a surprising revelation during closing arguments, prosecutors presented evidence that Powell had been planning to frame her husband for corporate espionage since 2019, 5 years before the events that led to her arrest. The defense argued that Dennis Powell's infiltration of the Tyson's facility was the triggering event, but prosecutors successfully demonstrated a long-term pattern of preparation. 5 years. She'd been planning to frame me for 5 years before I even knew Orion existed, which meant my infiltration hadn't triggered anything. It had just accelerated a trap she'd already built. The news cut to footage of the courthouse, Cora being led out in handcuffs. She looked smaller than I remembered, older. The professional mask she'd worn for decades was gone. 17 counts, 35 years, less than one count every 2 years. The math felt wrong, like trying to quantify something that couldn't be measured in charges and convictions. The surveillance network known as Orion has been permanently dismantled. The anchor continued. Federal authorities say the network compromised the personal information of over 2,400 classified clearance employees across 7 defense contractors. All victims have been notified and provided with identity protection services. 2,400 people, all of them targets, all of them commodities in a system Cora had built or inherited or been recruited into. I still didn't know which. The 1987 photograph flashed through my mind. Project Genesis. The man whose name I didn't know. The operation that predated everything. But that was a question for another day. Today was about closure. She had built an empire on the assumption that I would never look too closely at anything she did. The television didn't answer, just showed more courthouse footage, more legal experts analyzing the verdict, more speculation about sentencing. I turned off the TV and carried my cold coffee to the balcony. Alexandria spread out below me, traffic, people, normal life happening all around me. How many mornings had I made this same coffee while she watched through cameras I didn't know existed? How many conversations had I had, thinking they were private? How many moments had I lived believing they belonged to me alone? I'd spent 2 months processing those questions. 2 months learning to trust that the apartment I lived in now was actually mine, that the walls didn't have microphones, that the coffee I drank wasn't being logged in some database. It had taken a month before I stopped checking for cameras. Another 2 weeks before I stopped whispering when I talked to myself. And now, standing on this balcony with cold coffee and a news report confirming what I'd known since November, I realized something Cora had never understood. She'd believed surveillance revealed limits, that watching people showed you what they were capable of, what they would do when they thought no one was looking. But surveillance doesn't reveal limits, it reveals choices. For 35 years I'd chosen to stay, chosen to trust, chosen to believe the comfortable narrative over the uncomfortable truth. And then one night I'd chosen to leave. Cora had watched me make coffee for 3 decades and concluded I was someone who would never have the courage to walk away. Someone whose limits were clearly defined by comfort and routine. She'd been wrong. Not because I didn't have limits, but because limits and choices are different things, and she'd never understood the difference. I poured the cold coffee over the balcony railing, watched it fall 3 stories and disappear into the parking lot pavement. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Brock. She wants to see you, says she'll only talk to you. I stared at the message. Cora, in custody, convicted on all 17 counts, facing decades in federal prison, and she wanted to see me. Of course she did. After everything, the surveillance, the attempted murder, the trial, she still believed she could manipulate me, still believed that if she could just talk to me one more time, she could make me understand, make me forgive, make me see things from her perspective. I typed a response. When Brock's reply came back immediately. Detention center, tomorrow at 2 p.m. I can arrange it if you want to go. Did I want to go? I looked at my phone, at the empty coffee cup in my hand, at the Alexandria skyline stretching out before me. 2 months ago, I would have said no, would have cut all ties and moved forward without looking back. But I'd spent 2 months learning who I was when no one was watching. And one thing I'd learned was this: I didn't run from hard conversations anymore. I typed back, yes, arrange it. Brock sent a thumbs up emoji. Then, you sure? No, I typed, but I'm going anyway. Because Cora was wrong about my limits, and I was going to prove it one last time. I didn't go to see her. The morning of the scheduled visit, I sat with my coffee and watched the clock reach 2 o'clock and pass it. I had agreed the night before. I had meant it when I typed yes, but in the morning, light sitting in an apartment that was finally quiet and finally mine, I understood that I had already said everything worth saying in the hallway on floor 7, in the silence after the verdict. In the moment I turned and walked away without looking back. Some conversations don't need a final word. Brock called on a Thursday, asking if I wanted to have dinner. Just dinner, nothing about the case. We met at a small Italian place in Old Town Alexandria the following evening, the kind with red check tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. The hostess seated us near the window, where streetlights cast amber patterns across the worn wood floor. Brock ordered wine without asking if I wanted any. He did. How's the apartment?" he asked. "Quiet," I said. "Good quiet." He nodded, tore a piece of bread from the basket between us. The waiter appeared, recited specials. I didn't hear disappeared again with our orders. Brock talked about work, a new client. Something about zoning disputes in Fairfax County. I half listened, watching couples pass on the sidewalk outside, hands linked breath visible in the January cold. The food arrived. We ate in comfortable silence, broken by small observations. The pasta was good. The restaurant had been here since the 80s. Someone Brock knew from law school had moved to Portland. Normal conversation. The kind I'd forgotten existed. Midway through the meal, Brock set down his fork. His sentencing is in 2 weeks, he said quietly. I kept cutting my chicken. I know. Do you want to see her before then? The question landed without weight like ash settling. I finished chewing, swallowed, reached for my water glass. Outside, a couple stopped beneath the streetlight to kiss. The woman's scarf was red. No, I said. Brock waited. I already said what I needed to say. I continued. In the hallway, after the verdict. His eyebrows lifted slightly. What did you say? I met his eyes across the table. Nothing. That was the point. He studied me for a long moment, then picked up his fork again. Understanding passed between us without further words. The waiter came by to refill water glasses. Someone at the next table laughed. Life continued around us, indifferent and kind. We finished the meal talking about spring training, whether the Nationals had a chance this year. Brock paid despite my protest. Outside, we shook hands on the sidewalk. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. He walked toward the metro station collar, turned up against the wind. I headed the opposite direction, hands in my pockets, breath clouding white. Above, stars struggled against the city's glow. I didn't look back. The morning came ordinary and cold. I woke before dawn, out of habit, made coffee in the small kitchen, where the faucet still dripped no matter how tight I turned the handle. The radiator clanked and hissed, warming the apartment in uneven waves. I carried my mug to the balcony, sliding the glass door open to winter air that bit immediate and clean. Alexandria spread below windows, beginning to glow, with early risers traffic building on the distant highway. The sky lightened from black to deep blue to gray. I sipped coffee and watched. The jacket hung on the back of the balcony chair where I'd left it the night before. I reached into the inside pocket and withdrew the watch silver, catching the dawn weight familiar in my palm. 6 months it had been there since Tyson's Corner, since I'd removed it and never put it back on. I set it on the small metal table beside my coffee. Not thrown away, not worn, just there. The second hand swept its circuit steady and indifferent, time passing whether I counted it or not. The watch had been a gift from Cora, our 5th anniversary, back when gifts meant something other than control. I'd worn it every day for 3 decades, checking it compulsively, tracking her schedule, her movements, her lies. Now it sat on a table ticking into empty air. A memory surfaced unbidden, standing in the house after the fire, watching investigators sift through ash and debris. One had explained how fire damage worked, how the structure looked intact until you touched it, and everything collapsed into powder. Ashes give no warning, he'd said. I understood now what he meant. You couldn't predict the moment everything you'd built would crumble. You could only recognize it afterwards, standing in the wreckage, deciding what to do next. Ashes give no warning. Only survivors learn from them. The coffee cooled in my hand. Somewhere in the city, Cora was waking in a cell, counting days until sentencing, constructing whatever narrative would carry her forward. I didn't wonder what she was thinking. Didn't imagine the conversation we'd never have. She was living her consequences. I was living mine. The choice had always been there to wear the watch, or set it down to monitor her life, or build my own, to let the past dictate the future, or simply stop listening to it. I chose this morning, coffee, cold air, a city waking around me, the watch on the table instead of my wrist. Evidence not of what controlled me, but of what I'd chosen to release. A plane crossed overhead lights, blinking red against the pale sky. Below, a bus pulled away from a stop, diesel rumble, fading into the morning's white noise. The world moved forward. So did I. I picked up the coffee mug, felt the ceramic warm against my palms. The watch continued its sweep, marking seconds I didn't need to count. Later, I might put it in a drawer. Later still, I might not think of it at all. But right now, it sat where I'd placed it separate from me, no longer defining the minutes of my day. The coffee was hot, the morning was ordinary, and for the first time in 35 years, I didn't know what Cora Powell was doing. I'd learned enough. There are evenings when everything looks better than it actually is, and that Friday night in November was one of those evenings. I sat at the dining room table, checking the worn leather watch my wife had given me a decade earlier. 7:15. The candles I'd lit at 6:30 had burned down a quarter inch. The Bordeaux, her favorite, the one we saved for special occasions, sat breathing in its decanter, catching the light like something precious. 35 years. I'd been married to Cora Powell for 35 years, and she had never been late for an anniversary. I'm 60 years old. I spent 3 decades designing biometric security systems for Homeland Security before I retired last spring. I know how to read patterns. I know when something breaks from its expected behavior. And sitting there in our McLean dining room, watching steam rise from the coq au vin I'd spent 4 hours preparing, I felt the first cold thread of wrongness work its way up my spine. My phone buzzed against the table. "I'll be a little late, don't wait." I stared at the text. Cora didn't do little and late on anniversaries. She planned, she scheduled. She arrived early with flowers and that particular smile that meant she'd been thinking about this evening all week. I stood and walked to our bedroom, not quite sure what I was looking for. The house felt too quiet. Our home in McLean had always been quiet. No kids running through halls, just Brock, and he'd been gone since college, but this was different. This was the silence that comes before something breaks. I opened the drawer of her bedside table. I don't know why. Instead, I found our wedding photo. The old one from 1989, both of us 35 years younger, and infinitely more certain about what the future held. Cora's smile in that photograph was the same smile I'd seen this morning when she kissed me goodbye. I closed the drawer quickly. Instinct told me that looking at that photograph any longer would shatter something I wasn't ready to face. When did waiting for someone you love become the same as waiting for something to go wrong? Then my phone rang. Not a text, a call. The kind of sustained urgent ringing that makes your stomach drop before you even see the name on the screen. Brock. My son was 34, an FBI counterintelligence agent with the Washington field office, and he called me once a week on Sundays to ask about home repairs and whether I'd watch the game. He did not call on Friday nights. He did not call during what he knew was my anniversary dinner. I answered. "Dad." His voice was casual, too casual. "Mom's not home yet." "She'll be home soon," I said. "What's wrong?" There was half a second of silence. In that half second, I heard my son make a decision. "Don't ask anything." His voice had completely changed. It was the voice of someone trained to give orders when there's no time for questions. "Leave. Right now." I felt my hand tighten on the phone. 30 years of designing security systems had taught me one thing. When someone with FBI training tells you to move, you move. "Leave the house." "Dad!" The word came out hard-clipped. "I need you to trust me. Get in your car. Drive. Don't pack. Don't wait. Do it now." I didn't know that in 3 minutes the house behind me would cease to exist. "Where's your mother?" The question came out before I could stop it. "I don't know." For the first time in the call, Brock's voice cracked. Not much. Just enough for me to hear 34 years of being my son underneath 4 years of being a federal agent. "That's why you need to leave." I looked at the dining room table, 2 place settings, 2 candles burning in the November dark, a bottle of Bordeaux open for a woman who texted she'd be a little late. "I'm leaving," I said. I hung up. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask where to go. I didn't ask what Brock knew that I didn't. Some part of my brain, the part that had spent 3 decades planning for scenarios where seconds mattered, understood that questions were a luxury I no longer had. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door and ran. I didn't lock the door behind me. I didn't turn off the lights. I didn't look back at the dinner table with 2 candles still burning, waiting for a wife who would never sit there again. The cold November air hit my face as I sprinted across our front lawn toward the driveway. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, not yet. From the sudden animal understanding that everything I thought I knew about my life had just become conditional. My car was parked in the driveway where I'd left it that morning. Silver sedan, 12 years old, nothing special. I yanked the door open and threw myself into the driver's seat. That's when I heard Brock's voice again, not on the phone this time, but in my memory. "Don't wait." I jammed the key into the ignition. Behind me, through the still open front door of our house, I could see the dining room, the candles, the wine, the table set for 2 people who would never sit there together again. I turned the key and the engine caught. I shifted into reverse and the car rolled backward down the driveway. My hands had started to shake, not violently, just enough to make the steering wheel feel unfamiliar under my palms. 30 years of security work had taught me one thing. Always check your six. Always look back. It's the instinct that keeps you alive when everything else fails. I turned my head to look through the rear window as I backed into the street. That's when I saw her. Cora Powell, my wife of 35 years, stood 40 feet from our house at the edge of the side yard. 58 years old, elegant even in the November, cold president of the Powell Foundation for the last decade. She wore the navy coat I'd seen her put on that morning when she kissed me goodbye. In her right hand she held a small black device. I could see her face in the rearview mirror perfectly framed by the angle of my retreat. It wasn't the face of someone panicked. It wasn't the face of someone distressed or confused or caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. It was the face of someone completing a task. That's not the face of someone who's surprised. I said to no one, my voice strange in the silence of the car. That's the face of someone who planned this. Cora pressed the button. Nothing announced itself. No concussion, no shockwave, just light orange and wrong blooming from the ground floor windows like something patient had finally stopped waiting. She hadn't blown it up. She'd burned it. I watched through the rear window as the glow climbed the exterior walls. The glass didn't shatter. The structure didn't move. It just began to consume itself from the inside, the way things do when fire has time to work quietly. I didn't scream. I didn't gasp. I just looked. Through the rear window in the rearview mirror, I could still see Cora's face. She was watching the fire with the same calm expression she'd worn holding the detonator. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look sad. She looked satisfied. For one frozen second, our eyes met in the mirror. She didn't know I was watching her. She thought I'd already driven away, already escaped like Brock told me to. She thought the only witness to this moment was the empty street and the November night. But I saw her. I saw everything. The 35 years, I said to the rearview mirror, and I never saw this. I stepped on the gas. The house I had lived in for 22 years was gone, just fire now. I drove west because west was the direction the car was already pointed. No plan, no destination, just Highway 66 stretching out into the dark and the absolute understanding that the woman I'd loved for 3.5 decades had just tried to kill me. My phone, my real phone, the one with my whole life in it, sat in my jacket pocket. I didn't touch it. 30 years of designing security systems had taught me that phones are the first thing they track. Phones are how they find you. I didn't even know who they were yet, but Cora had become they the moment she pressed that button. I drove for 20 minutes before the shaking in my hands got bad enough that I had to pull over. Manassas gas station. Fluorescent lights and diesel smell, and the particular emptiness of places that exist solely for people passing through. I walked inside on legs that felt like someone else's legs. The clerk behind the counter looked up from his phone. Early 20s, bored, the kind of kid who worked the night shift because it meant he didn't have to talk to people. "You okay, sir?" he asked. I realized I must look like something. Maybe everything that had just happened was written on my face in language this kid could read even if he didn't understand it. "Fine," I said. "Just the phone, please." I pointed to the prepaid phones hanging on the rack behind him. The cheap kind. The kind you buy with cash and throw away when you're done. He handed me one without comment. $39.95. I paid with two 20s from the $300 I kept in my wallet. That $300 was a habit. Cora had always encouraged it. "You never know when you'll need cash," she'd said 1,000 times over the years. Security work taught you that, didn't it? Always be prepared. I stared at the remaining bills in my hand. She'd encouraged the habit because she knew. She'd known for how long? Years, decades. She'd known that one day I'd need cash to run, and she'd made sure I had it, because survivors with resources are easier to track than desperate men with nothing. For the first time that night, my hands trembled not from fear, but because I had just understood she had planned this long before tonight. I got back in the car and activated the prepaid phone. My fingers felt clumsy on the small keyboard. I dialed Brock's number from memory. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I hung up and tried again. 4 rings, voicemail. 3rd time, 4 rings, voicemail. 4th time, 4 rings, voicemail. "Brock isn't answering," I said to the empty car. "Either he can't, or he doesn't want anyone to know where he is. Tonight both reasons are equally bad." I placed the prepaid phone down on the passenger seat and stared straight ahead into the darkness beyond the gas station lights. There are 2 reasons why people don't answer their phones. Either they can't because something has happened to them, because they're compromised, because the situation has gone so wrong that communication itself has become dangerous. Or they don't want anyone to know where they are because they're running. because they're hiding, because answering would leave a trail that someone could follow. I looked at the phone sitting on the passenger seat, silent and useless. Tonight, both reasons were equally bad, and I had exactly 9 hours before I learned which one was true. 9 hours turned out to be wildly optimistic. I had no idea how long I had, but the first thing I needed was a place to stop moving. The first motel I saw had an orange vacancy sign flickering against the November darkness. I pulled into the parking lot at exactly 9 o'clock. Small place, the kind that doesn't ask questions. 12 units facing cracked asphalt. A neon sign that said Oasis Inn, but half the letters were dark. The night clerk barely looked up when I walked in. $62, he said. Cash only. Sign here. He pushed a registration card across the counter. I picked up the pen and wrote John Miller, the most forgettable name I could think of. ID, he asked without interest. Lost my wallet, I said. He assessed me for 2 seconds and decided I wasn't worth caring about. Room 114, end of the row. Checkout's at 11. He handed me a key on a plastic tag. I paid with 3 20s and 2 1s. He didn't offer change for the extra dollar. I didn't ask. Room 114 had a window overlooking the empty parking lot and a bed that sagged in the middle. I locked the door, fastened the chain, and sat on the edge of the bed. It was the first time I'd stopped moving since 7:23. My whole body felt wrong. Not tired, not hurt. Just wrong, like I'd been wearing someone else's skin and had only just noticed. I opened my wallet and counted what I had left. $238. The credit card was useless the moment I used it. Someone would know where I was. In my old life, I designed systems that tracked exactly that kind of financial footprint. Behind the cash was a small photograph I'd carried for 26 years. Brock at 8 years old, standing in front of our Christmas tree. The edges had yellowed. The photo had been folded and unfolded so many times that a white crease ran through the middle of my son's face. I took it out and placed it on the pillow beside me. Then I picked up the notepad and pen from the nightstand. Generic motel stationery, Oasis Inn printed across the top. I wrote 3 questions. Question 1, where is Brock? Question 2, what does Cora want? Question 3, how much time do I have before she realizes I'm still alive? I stared at the questions. The first question was urgent but unanswerable without more information. The second required understanding a woman I'd apparently never known. The third question was the one I couldn't answer, and that lack of an answer made everything else more urgent. I looked at the 3 questions on motel paper for a while. The third question, the one about time, was the question I couldn't answer, and that was the most dangerous one. If Cora thought I was dead, I had as much time as it took for someone to identify remains that didn't exist. Hours, maybe a day. If she thought I'd escaped, I had however long it took her to decide I was worth hunting. And if she knew I'd seen her holding that detonator, if she'd watched me drive away, then I had no time at all. I lay back on the bed without taking off my shoes. The ceiling had water stains in the shape of countries I couldn't name. I closed my eyes and tried to think strategically. Strategic thinking is what I did for 30 years. Threat assessment, response planning, understanding the adversary's next move before they made it. But the adversary was my wife, and I didn't know her next move because I'd never known her first move. I'd spent 3.5 decades living with someone whose entire existence might have been a performance I was too close to see. I wasn't planning to turn on the television, but the silence became too oppressive by 11:30. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I sat up and turned on the TV. Local news. The anchor was a woman in her 40s with perfect hair and the trained ability to deliver tragedy with gravitas but no emotion. Breaking news from McLean, she said. A serious fire destroyed a home on Westmoreland Avenue earlier this evening. Firefighters arrived at approximately 7:40 p.m. to find the structure fully engulfed. I sat completely still. Authorities have confirmed that someone was inside the house at the time of the fire. The victim's identity has not yet been released pending notification of next of kin. Someone was inside the house at the time of the fire. That someone was supposed to be me. The anchor moved on to traffic. I didn't hear it. I was too busy understanding what had just happened. Cora had reported me inside the house when it caught fire. Not missing, not fled, not escaped. Inside. In the next few hours, maybe by morning, Dennis Powell would officially be dead. Not a suspect. Not a person of interest. Not a man on the run. Dead. Which meant I had no papers, no home, no usable bank account, no legal existence. But it also meant I wouldn't be sought like a living person, because the only person who wanted me dead thought she'd already succeeded. I turned off the TV and sat in the dark. The most dangerous enemy is the one the other side thinks no longer exists. I'd said that to colleagues 100 times during my years in security work. Threat assessment training, strategic planning sessions. The enemy you've already eliminated is the enemy you stop watching for. Tonight I understood it for the first time from the other side. Cora thought I was dead. That gave me something I hadn't had an hour ago. Time, not much, but enough to ask the right questions, enough to find Brock, enough to understand what my wife wanted badly enough to burn down 3.5 decades and call it solved. I lay back down on the sagging mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Tomorrow morning, I would need help from the only person I could still trust, if he was even still trustworthy. I left the library at noon and drove without destination until the need to stop became greater than the need to move. I checked into a new motel in Fairfax at 5 o'clock Sunday evening and was opening a box of crackers I bought from the vending machine when the evening news came on. I wasn't paying attention at first, just background noise while I tried to eat something my body would accept. The crackers tasted like cardboard and salt. I ate them anyway. Then I heard the anchor say a name I knew. Breaking news from Washington FBI agent Brock Powell, 34, has not shown up for work and has been unreachable by phone or colleagues since this morning. The FBI is asking anyone with information to contact. I stopped mid-bite. The screen showed Brock's official FBI photo. Professional, serious. The face of someone who'd spent 4 years learning to give nothing away. Missing since Sunday morning. Not an accident. Not voluntary. Cora couldn't find me after the house fire, so she used him. Not an accident, I said to the television. Not voluntary. She couldn't find me, so she used him. The news moved on to traffic and weather. I turned off the TV and sat very still on the edge of the motel bed. Brock was alive. I was sure of it. Cora needed him not just to force me out of hiding, but for another reason I didn't understand yet. Something about the Orion sale, something about the timeline. Brock was missing. Not dead, not safe, missing, which meant she had him, which meant I had hours, maybe less. I pulled out the prepaid phone and stared at it. Calling Brock's number would accomplish nothing. If he could answer, he would have answered already. If he couldn't answer, calling would only confirm to whoever was monitoring his phone that I was alive and looking for him. Calling the FBI was equally useless. What would I say? My wife, who you think I died with on Friday, has kidnapped our son to force me out of hiding because we're both on a biometric theft list. She's selling to Eastern European criminals for $20 million. They'd trace the call and find me before I finished the sentence. I put the phone down and tried to think strategically. Cora had Brock. She needed something from him. Access codes, authentication credentials, something only an FBI agent could provide. That's why he was missing instead of dead. That's why the timeline mattered. The Orion sale was November 8th, 5 days from now. If she needed Brock's cooperation to complete the transaction, she'd keep him alive until then. 5 days. I looked at the motel clock. It was 6:30 Sunday evening. In 5 days, my son's biometric identity would be sold to criminals who could use it to bypass every security system I'd spent 30 years building. Unless I stopped it. I tried to sleep at 9 o'clock and failed. Tried again at 10 and failed worse. At 11, I gave up and sat in the chair by the window watching cars pass on the highway outside. I thought about Cora, not what she'd done, who she was, who I thought she was. We met 36 years ago at a government contractor conference. She introduced herself as Cora. I never thought to ask if that was the name she'd been born with. She was brilliant, sharp, the kind of person who saw patterns others missed. I was 24 and convinced I was smarter than I actually was. She was 22 and genuinely smarter than everyone else in the room. 3 months after we met, she told me a story. She'd led a data research project at a government-affiliated think tank. 6 years of work, innovative methodology, groundbreaking results. And then one day, without explanation, the project was shut down. No warning, no justification. Just a memo saying the research was being transferred to another department and her services were no longer required. They took what I built with 6 years of my life, she said. We were sitting in her apartment drinking wine that was too expensive for either of our salaries. And without even saying thank you. I'd held her hand across the table. That's why we don't work for the system, I'd said. We work for each other. She'd looked at me with an expression I'd interpreted as gratitude, maybe even love. 36 years later, sitting in a Fairfax motel at 2 in the morning, I understood that expression differently. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't love. It was recognition. She'd found someone who would build the systems she needed to take back what she thought the government had stolen from her. I sat on that motel chair at 2 a.m. and realized I spent 35 years believing I knew Cora Powell. 35 years knowing only the person she wanted me to see. Orion hadn't started from greed. It had started from bitterness, from betrayal, from a 22-year-old woman who'd had 6 years of work taken away without explanation. And I'd helped her. Not knowingly, not intentionally, but I'd built the authentication system she needed. I'd designed the security protocols she'd later exploited. I'd spent 30 years creating the tools she'd used to steal identities from the same government that had stolen hers. She wasn't lying about that pain, I said to the empty motel room. The question wasn't whether her bitterness was real. The question was whether real bitterness justified what she'd become. And sitting there at 2 in the morning, I knew the answer. Number. Bitterness might explain the first step. But Orion wasn't one step. It was a decade of calculated choices. It was 2,400 people whose lives she'd commodified. It was a son she'd put on a list to be sold. It was a husband she'd tried to burn alive because he'd become inconvenient. I sat in that chair until sunrise and thought about the woman I'd married. The woman across from me at 1,000 dinners. The woman I'd kissed goodbye 10,000 mornings. I had never actually known her at all, only the version she had decided I was allowed to see. The question I needed to answer now wasn't why. The question was how much time I had left. The sun came up at 6:40 Monday morning. I watched it through the motel window and felt nothing. Somewhere out there, my son was being held by his mother for purposes I didn't fully understand. Somewhere out there, a data sale worth $20 million was scheduled to complete in 4 days. And somewhere out there, a woman I'd loved for 3.5 decades was waiting for me to make a mistake. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. But first I needed to know where she was keeping my son. The prepaid phone rang at 9 o'clock Monday morning, an unknown number. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Hello, Mr. Powell. A woman's voice, professional, controlled. The kind of voice that had been trained to sound warm without actually being warm. My name is Clarice Kelly. I'm the family attorney. I just heard about the fire and about Brock. I'm so sorry for your loss. I said nothing. I can help you with your legal and insurance matters immediately, she continued. I know this must be a terrible time, but there are practical concerns that need addressing. Yeah, how did you get this number? I asked. There was a pause, short, maybe 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, Clarice Kelly made a decision about how much truth to tell. Cora left it with me earlier, she said. In case of emergency. I looked at the prepaid phone in my hand. The phone I'd bought Friday night with cash at a Manassas gas station. The phone whose number I'd given to exactly one person. Thaddeus Greer, Saturday morning, standing in his Arlington kitchen. I see, I said. Can we meet? Clarice asked. Brief, just to discuss your options. I'm in Alexandria this afternoon. I'll call you back, I said and hung up. I set up the meeting and sat still for a while. A lawyer called the prepaid number I bought Friday with cash. The number I only gave Thaddeus. Either Thaddeus had reported it to Cora, or surveillance existed that I didn't yet understand. Both options were bad. The first meant Thaddeus was compromised voluntarily, or under pressure I didn't know which. The second meant Cora's reach extended further than I'd calculated. I needed to know which one was true. I met Clarice Kelly at 11:30 in a coffee shop in Old Town Alexandria. She was 55, impeccably dressed, with the kind of professional warmth that a state attorneys practice until it becomes indistinguishable from genuine concern. She offered condolences. She explained insurance procedures. She asked if I needed help with memorial arrangements. I nodded in appropriate places and said very little. What she didn't ask about was Brock. She'd mentioned him on the phone, about Brock. She'd said, but in person sitting across from me with coffee neither of us drank, she never brought him up again. That told me everything I needed to know about whose side she was on. I thanked her for her time and left at 12:15. Then I drove back to Thaddeus's house in Arlington. He answered the door with surprise that looked genuine. Ray, I didn't know you were coming back. I need to use the terminal again, I said. Just for an hour, then I'll be out of your way. He stepped aside and let me in. Of course, stay as long as you need. You want lunch?" "I'm fine," I said. I went to the study and sat at the old DHS terminal. The screen came to life with a login prompt that hadn't changed in 15 years. I entered credentials I shouldn't still remember. Legacy maintenance account. Unrevoked. Sitting in a subsystem no one had thought to delete because deleting it would require admitting it existed in the first place. Legacy credential accepted. I was in. I navigated to the procurement database. Contract records, facility leases, shell companies and subsidiary organizations connected to federal contracts that had been active in the last decade. Powell Foundation appeared in 17 files. I opened each one systematically. Most were legitimate charitable grants research partnerships, the kind of paperwork that made a foundation look like a foundation. Then I found the one that wasn't. Tyson's Corner office building, 7th floor, leased under a shell company called Orion Technical Services LLC. Parent organization, Powell Foundation. The address burned itself into my memory. I didn't write it down. I didn't save the file. The most important things stay in your head, not on paper someone else can find. That's when I heard Thaddeus in the next room, speaking very low, on the phone. I couldn't hear every word clearly through the closed door, but I heard enough. "Yeah, actually, I'm still here. And yes, using the terminal now. And I don't know, maybe another hour." Thaddeus was in the next room, speaking very low. I didn't need to hear every word to know what was happening. I kept looking at the screen, calm, typing normally. My hands moved across the keyboard like I was still researching, still searching, still unaware that the man who'd helped me Saturday was reporting my location to someone who wanted me found. I opened 3 more files, skimmed them without reading, closed them, made it look like I was still working. In the next room, Thaddeus's voice dropped even lower. I heard, "Understand," and "soon as he leaves." I had maybe 20 minutes before Thaddeus reported I'd left his house, maybe less. I needed to use every one of them. I logged out of the terminal properly, cleared the session history, stood up and stretched like someone who'd been sitting too long. Then I walked into the living room. Thaddeus was sitting on the couch, no phone visible, reading the newspaper like he'd been there the whole time. "Find what you needed?" he asked without looking up. "Some of it," I said. "Thanks for letting me use the system." "Anytime, Ray." He turned a page. "You staying for dinner?" "I can't. I have some things to take care of." "Be careful out there." He looked at me over the newspaper. His eyes were tired, guilty, but not sorry enough to stop. "A lot of people are looking for you." "I know," I said. I walked to the door, picked up the car keys he'd lent me Saturday, turned back one more time. "Thaddeus?" "Yeah." "Thank you for everything." He nodded. "Take care of yourself, Ray." I walked out and got in the car. I had saved the Tyson's Corner address to memory not written down, not saved to file. Paper leaves trails, memory doesn't. I drove east toward Fairfax and started planning. Planning meant reconstructing what I knew and identifying what I didn't. I left Thaddeus's house at 2:30 Monday afternoon and drove to Fairfax Public Library. The library opened at 3 o'clock. I was waiting in the parking lot when the doors unlocked. I found a table in the back corner where I could see both entrances. Took a stack of blank paper and a pencil from the reference desk, sat down and started writing. Not typing, writing, by hand, on paper that would leave no digital trace. I reconstructed from memory the complete security architecture I knew Orion had to be using. Biometric authentication portals, access protocols, legacy system integration points. The kind of technical documentation that existed in my head because I'd spent 30 years building and maintaining it. I started with the foundation, the 1994 original framework, Federal Biometric Authentication System. I'd designed for predecessor agencies, the ones later absorbed into Homeland Security when the department formed in 2003. Back then, the security standards were still being written by people like me. I'd designed that system, every line of code, every authentication sequence, every failsafe and bypass. And as I wrote, I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. Orion wasn't just using similar systems. It was built directly on my original architecture, the 1994 framework. Through decades of upgrades and modern interfaces and additional security layers, the basement code was still mine. Because no one had deleted it. Deletion means admitting vulnerabilities. Admitting that the original system had flaws. Admitting that security protocols from 30 years ago might not meet modern standards. So instead, they built on top, layer after layer, Modern authentication on top of legacy code that still worked perfectly well if you knew it existed. I knew it existed. They never deleted the legacy code. Deletion means admitting vulnerabilities, so it stays buried under decades of upgrades waiting for someone who remembers it exists. I kept writing command sequences, access backdoors, maintenance protocols that were supposed to be decommissioned but never actually removed from the system because removal would require acknowledging they were there in the first place. I wrote for 2 hours. The paper filled with technical specifications that would mean nothing to anyone who didn't understand federal security architecture from 3 decades ago. But to me, it was a map, a blueprint, a way inside a system that thought it was impenetrable because no one remembered the foundation it was built on. Except I remembered. I tore the paper into small pieces and threw them in the different trash cans when I left the library. What I needed, I kept in my head. That was the safest place. It always had been. The knowledge was there now, accessible, complete. I knew how to get into the Tyson's facility. I knew which cameras had blind spots. I knew which access points still accepted legacy credentials. I knew exactly which commands to enter if I needed to disable biometric verification for 60 seconds. 60 seconds. That's all I would need. I left the library at 6 o'clock and drove back to Arlington. Thaddeus answered the door like he'd been waiting for me. Ray, I was starting to worry. And just research, I said. Can I bother you for dinner? Of course. He made pasta from a box. Neither of us said much. We sat at his kitchen table and ate like 2 old friends who'd run out of conversation years ago. At 7 o'clock, I stood up and took my coat. I should get going, I said in a normal tone that revealed nothing. Thaddeus stood up immediately, too quickly, with the particular enthusiasm of someone trying very hard to sound casual. Stay another night, Ray. It's dangerous out there. I looked at him for a long moment. Thaddeus looked back. We both understood what was happening. Both knew what he was doing. Both knew why. He had someone he was protecting, a daughter maybe, or a grandchild, someone Cora had leverage over, someone whose safety depended on Thaddeus doing exactly what he was told. I understood that, better than he probably realized. Thank you, Thaddeus, I said, for everything. I held out my hand. He shook it. His grip was firm, guilty, but not apologetic. Where are you going? He asked. I didn't answer. We both knew he would report it anyway. Be careful, he said. You too. I walked to the car and got in. I wasn't angry. Anger would have been a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I felt something closer to understanding. People do unimaginable things when the people they love are threatened. Thaddeus was doing what he had to do to protect someone. I was doing what I had to do to protect Brock. We were both fathers, just on opposite sides of a war neither of us had chosen. I started the engine and pulled out of his driveway. I had a narrow window. Thaddeus would make his call the moment my taillights cleared his street. I knew that much. I needed to use every second before the window closed. I drove out of Thaddeus's neighborhood. 20 minutes, maybe less. I had a list of things to do before midnight, and none of them could wait until morning. First, find a place to park for 3 hours where no one would notice a man sitting alone in a car. Second, wait until the Tyson's Corner office district cleared out. Until the late workers went home and the cleaning crews finished and the building became what it truly was. After dark, an empty shell with security systems that thought they were impenetrable. Third, use knowledge that only I possessed to walk into that building, like I still worked there, like I had every right to be there, like the legacy credentials in my head were still valid because no one had thought to revoke access for systems that weren't supposed to exist anymore. Fourth, find my son. Fifth, get both of us out alive. I didn't have a sixth step. 6 was optimistic. 5 was ambitious. But 4 was non-negotiable. I drove toward Tyson's Corner and started watching the clock. The first item on that list would take me back to Tyson's Corner in the dark, and I would be going in alone. No backup, no support. No plan beyond the knowledge in my head and the hope that 30 years of building security systems would be enough to defeat the one system I'd never imagined would be used against me. My own. The server room hummed around me, racks of hardware processing data they were never meant to process in a room that was never meant to exist. Floor 6 has 11 doors. 10 have signs. The 11th door at the end of the left hallway has nothing, just a slightly different colored wall panel. I'd found it by counting, by reconstructing the floor plan from memory, by knowing that rooms which don't officially exist still occupy physical space. The wall panel clicked when I pressed it, not locked, just hidden. Inside was a server room that wasn't on any official documentation. I sat at the workstation and logged in with the same legacy credential that had gotten me into the building. The system accepted it without question. The screen filled with directories, files, databases. I opened the first folder, Audio Archive. The timestamp on the oldest file was November 1989, 35 years ago, 1 month after Cora and I were married. I clicked on a file at random. January 1994. My own voice came through the speakers, talking to Brock. He was 8 years old in that recording, asking about homework. I was helping him with fractions. The audio was clear, professional quality. Not the kind of thing you got from a cheap recording device hidden in a room. This was planned, systematic, 35 years of surveillance in my own home. I closed that file and opened another. May 2003, another dinner conversation, another normal evening that I'd thought was private. I opened a third file. This one was dated October 2024, last month. Cora's voice, not talking to me, talking to someone else. A conversation I'd never heard because I hadn't been in the room. Orion is ready for transfer, she said. The buyer confirmed November 8th, 20 million on delivery. We need to make sure both targets are handled before then. Another voice, male. I didn't recognize it. What about your husband? He's useful until he isn't, Cora said. Her voice was matter of fact, clinical. Once the transfer completes, we'll handle it. Make it look like an accident. The house fire is already planned. I stopped the playback. She'd recorded herself, discussing Orion, discussing plans to eliminate me. She'd kept evidence of her own crimes in a room she thought no one could access, because she never thought I'd be standing here. I sat on the floor in that room at 1:23 in the morning, 35 years without privacy. And this was the perfect evidence, both things true at the same time. For the first time in 4 days, I didn't know what to feel first. Devastation at the surveillance, vindication at the evidence, rage at the betrayal, relief that I could prove it. All of it was true. None of it canceled out the others. I stood up at 1:28 and got to work. I pulled an encrypted drive from my pocket. Commercial grade, purchased legally 3 days ago, along with the GPS transmitter components. I connected it to the first USB port and started copying files. Not everything. There wasn't enough time to copy terabytes of data. But I didn't need everything. I just needed enough for the FBI to have probable cause for a full warrant. I copied selectively. Audio highlights from Cora's recordings, system metadata from Orion, transaction logs showing the sales schedule, financial records linking the Powell Foundation to shell companies, evidence that would be admissible, evidence that would matter. The progress bar moved slowly, 12%, 18%, 24%. While the files copied, I scrolled through the directory structure looking for anything else that might be relevant. That's when I found the file that changed everything. Powell_Brock_voice_auth. I opened it. Inside was a voice authentication system, Brock's voice, recorded samples, phonetic patterns, the kind of biometric data you need when you're building a security system that requires vocal confirmation. Brock's voice had been secretly recorded, processed, integrated into Orion's authentication protocols. I read the technical documentation attached to the file. The system required dual authentication for high-value transactions, primary fingerprint scan, secondary voice confirmation matching stored biometric pattern. The voice pattern on file was Brock's, which meant Cora didn't just need Brock as bait to force me out of hiding. She needed his voice for the system to continue operating after the data sale completed. Brock's voice, authentication. She needed him alive, not for me, for the system. That's why he's still breathing, I said to the empty room. If Brock was dead, the authentication would fail. The sale couldn't complete. $20 million would evaporate because a dead man can't speak the confirmation codes. The progress bar hit 100% at 146. I ejected the drive and put it in my inner jacket pocket. Then I did something I knew I shouldn't do, but couldn't stop myself from doing. I opened one more file. December 1989, the first Christmas after we were married. My voice and Cora's voice, laughing about something I couldn't even remember now. Young, happy. The sound of two people who thought they had their whole lives ahead of them. I closed the file. That couple didn't exist anymore. Maybe they never had. Maybe I'd been living with a stranger for 35 years and just hadn't known it. Or maybe the woman in that recording had been real, and something had broken her so thoroughly that she'd become someone else entirely. I didn't know which option was worse. I stood up and turned off the monitor. The encrypted drive felt heavier than it should, a few ounces of metal and silicon, containing evidence that would destroy my wife's life. Evidence that would also prove I'd spent 35 years being watched in my own home. Evidence that would save my son. I pressed the elevator button. Brock was somewhere on floor 7. I knew that now. The file structure had been organized by location. Floor 7, room 714. I had maybe 4 minutes before internal response protocols triggered. Maybe less if I'd tripped something I didn't know about. 4 minutes to find my son. 4 minutes to get both of us out of a building we'd never legally been in. 4 minutes before everything I'd done tonight either worked or failed catastrophically. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and pressed 7. The elevator doors opened onto floor 7 at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. Floor 7 was brighter than floor 6. The hallway lights were still on, at a low setting enough to walk through without tripping. I counted doors from the end of the hallway, standard office layout, conference rooms, supply closets, nothing that looked like a prison. The last room on the left had a sliver of light underneath the door. I stood in front of it and used the same legacy credential I'd used everywhere else tonight, the same command sequence. The same system that didn't know it shouldn't trust me anymore. The lock disengaged with a soft click. I pushed the door open. Brock was sitting upright in an office chair, not restrained, not injured, just locked in a normal office room with a desk and a computer and fluorescent lights that were still on. He looked at me. His eyes were alert, tired but alert. The first thing he said wasn't, "What are you doing here, Dad?" or "Are you okay?" The first thing he said was, "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." I looked at my son, 34 years old, FBI counterintelligence agent. The boy who'd asked me about fractions when he was 8. The man who'd spent some unknown amount of time locked in this room, knowing things about his mother that I hadn't learned until 4 days ago. "How long have you known?" I asked. 6 months, Brock said. "I've been building a case for 6 months. I was waiting until I had enough evidence that it wouldn't just be your word against hers. You should have told me." "I know." He stood up. "But you were still happy. And I didn't want to be the one to take that away from you until I could also give you a way to fix it." I looked at my son, this boy who had his mother's intelligence and my habit of carrying too much alone. "Talk later," I said. "Let's go." Brock took 1 step toward the door, then stopped. "It's Dad, do you have anything to copy data with?" I pulled the encrypted drive from my jacket pocket. "Good," Brock said. "I'll give you 90 seconds. He walked back to the office chair and reached under the seat cushion, pulled out a phone. The screen was off, but the power light was blinking green. Battery indicator showed 12%. She took my work phone. Brock said, connecting the phone to my encrypted drive with a cable from his pocket. But she didn't think to check if I had a second one. I'd been turning off the screen to save battery, pretending it was dead. Files started syncing. Progress bar appeared on the phone screen. "What's on there?" I asked. 7 conversations, Brock said. She came in to talk to me 7 times over 3 days, interrogating, threatening, explaining her plan with the confidence of someone who was certain I wouldn't escape to tell anyone. "You recorded her one-party consent," Brock said. "I was a party to each conversation, legal under Federal Wiretap Act and Virginia state law. Every word admissible." The progress bar moved, 20%, 35%, 48%. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" I asked. "Before Friday, before any of this." Brock looked at me. "Because you were still happy," he said. "And I didn't want to be the one to take that away until I could also give you proof that would hold up in court. I needed more than recordings. I needed documentation. I needed financial evidence. I needed something that couldn't be dismissed as a domestic dispute." 62%, 71%. "And then she moved up the timeline," I said. "Thursday night," Brock confirmed. "I got a tip from someone inside her network, someone who didn't know I was her son. The house fire was scheduled for Friday. I called you as soon as I could confirm it wasn't just rumor." 84%, 91%. "You saved my life," I said. "You came back for me," Brock said. "We're even." 100%. Brock disconnected the phone and handed me back the encrypted drive. "Battery at 12%, he said. 7 conversations. 3 days of Mom explaining her plan to someone she thought would never leave this room. I put the drive back in my inner jacket pocket. 2 pieces of evidence now. The surveillance files from floor 6. Brock's recordings from this room. Enough, Dad, Brock said. More than enough. We walked to the door together. I opened it first, checked the hallway. Empty. The low lights still on, no movement, no sound except the hum of HVAC systems and the distant elevator machinery. How do we get out? Brock asked. The way I came in, I said, service entrance, basement level, legacy credentials that the system still accepts because no one remembered to revoke them. You use the 1994 maintenance accounts, Brock said. Not a question, a statement. You knew about those. I've been studying her operation for 6 months, Brock said. I know she built it on your architecture. I was hoping you'd figure out the same access points I did. When this is over, I said, we're going to have a very long conversation about operational security and when to share information with your father. When this is over, Brock said, I'm buying you dinner and we're never talking about security systems again. We stepped out into the hallway, and the lights on the 7th floor came on all at once. Not the low setting that had been there when I arrived, full brightness, every panel, every fixture. The hallway went from dimly lit to absolutely illuminated in the span of a single second. Not because someone flipped a switch. The system activated itself. Dad, Brock said quietly. That's not good. Oh, no, I said. That's not good. I'd changed something in the database when I accessed the server room on floor 6. Modified something. The system had taken 90 minutes to detect the anomaly and respond. And now it was responding. How long do we have? Brock asked. I don't know, I said. Which was true. I didn't know if the lights were an automatic security protocol, or if someone had just been notified that there was an unauthorized presence in the building. I didn't know if we had minutes or seconds. What I did know was that standing in a brightly lit hallway wasn't going to improve our odds. Move, I said. We started toward the elevator, and that's when I saw her at the end of the hallway. The lights flooded the hallway, and at the end of it stood Cora, my wife of 35 years, 58 years old, elegant even at 2 a.m. Professional demeanor that had always made her look like she belonged in boardrooms and foundation galas. She was calm, not surprised, not panicked, vindicated. Hello, Dennis, she said. Her voice carried down the hallway with perfect clarity. I was wondering when you'd figure out the access codes. I felt Brock tense beside me. She knew, I said quietly. Of course I knew, Cora said. She took 3 steps forward, measured, controlled. I let you in. The legacy credentials you're so proud of, I left them active. The camera blind spots, I made sure they stayed in the rotation. She stopped walking. The hallway went silent, just the hum of HVAC and my heartbeat in my ears. Why? I asked. Because I needed both of you in one place, Cora said. She looked at Brock, then back at me. Father and son, together, inside my facility, where the biometric sensors could document that you were both here, where the system could prove you broke in. I understood then. The trap wasn't to stop us. It was to frame us. The lights activating wasn't a malfunction, I said. It was confirmation. Cora agreed. Proof that you altered the system. Proof that you accessed files you had no authorization to access. Proof that when the FBI arrives, and they will arrive, you'll be the criminals, not me. Brock's hand moved to his pocket. The encrypted drive. The evidence we just copied. She knows about the drive, Brock said quietly. Of course I know, Cora said. Do you think I'd leave evidence in a room you could access if I didn't want you to find it? Those files are bait, Brock. Inadmissible. Obtained through illegal entry. Everything you copied is useless in court. I looked at my wife. This woman I'd loved for 3.5 decades. This stranger I'd never actually known. You planned all of this, I said. Every step, Cora confirmed. From the house fire to your escape to Thaddeus helping you. I knew you'd come here eventually. I just had to wait for you to incriminate yourself. I thought about Friday night, about Brock's warning call, about the fire I'd seen rising in the rearview mirror, about every choice I'd made since then that had led me exactly here. What if she's expecting us? Brock had asked me in the car earlier. I'd dismissed it, told him we didn't have a choice. I should have listened. Before I tell you what happened next in that hallway, I need to know, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think Cora planned everything perfectly, or B, if you think Dennis still has a way out. Add one short reason. Please note, what follows includes some fictionalized details for narrative impact. If that's not for you, this is a good place to stop. You made one mistake, I said to Cora. Did I? She smiled. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who'd already won. You assumed I came alone. Cora's smile faltered, just for a second, just enough for me to see the calculation behind her eyes. Oh, Thaddeus reported your location, she said. No one else knows you're here. Oh, Thaddeus, I said. Right. I didn't know what was happening in the parking lot below until Rosalba told me about it 3 hours later over terrible coffee in an FBI conference room. But this is what she described. Outside in the parking lot, 3 stories below, Thaddeus Greer stood with his phone in his hand. My friend for 11 years. And for the last 4 days, Cora's informant. Rosalba Yates stood beside him, 33, FBI agent. The woman who'd been working the Orion case for nearly 2 years. Thaddeus looked at his phone, looked at Rosalba. She's inside, he said. Floor 7, with both of them. You did the right thing, Rosalba said. Calling us. Thaddeus nodded. He looked tired, guilty, but resolved. My daughter, he said. Cora had leverage over my daughter. Said she'd destroy her career if I didn't cooperate. I believed her. We'll protect your daughter, Rosalba said. I know. Thaddeus took a breath. But I can't protect Cora anymore, not after what she's planning to do to them. He dialed a number, not Cora's, not mine. FBI tip line. This is Thaddeus Greer, he said when someone answered. I'm calling to report a federal crime in progress. Tyson's Corner, 7900 West Park Drive. Floor 7. Corporate espionage and attempted murder. The suspect is inside now with 2 hostages. He gave them details, location, access codes, everything they could need for legal entry. That was Rosalba's account. I have no reason to doubt a word of it. Then he hung up and looked at Rosalba. They're coming, he said. Maybe 4 minutes. Good, Rosalba said. She pulled out her own phone. I'll coordinate with the response team. Inside on floor 7, I heard something through the window behind Cora. Sirens, distant but getting closer. Cora heard them too. Her expression didn't change. They're coming for you, she said. Not me. You broke into my building. You stole my files. When they arrive, I'll be the victim. Will you? I asked. I looked past her, through the 7th floor window. The parking lot below was dark except for the streetlights. And then it wasn't. Red and blue lights reflected off the pavement. Distant but approaching. Emergency vehicles moving fast. FBI, Brock said quietly. Not police, FBI. Cora's expression still didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, just slightly. You called them, she said. No, I said. I didn't. The lights got closer. The sirens got louder. Cora stood perfectly still, watching the lights approach, calculating. Thaddeus, she said finally. Oh, Thaddeus, I confirmed. She looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time in maybe years, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't calculation or control. Uncertainty. He chose justice, I said. Over loyalty, over leverage, over you. The sirens were close now, maybe 90 seconds away. Cora took 1 step backward, then stopped. She knew what I knew. There was nowhere to run. The building was surrounded. The evidence was copied. The FBI was coming. And for the first time in 35 years, she didn't have a plan for what happened next. The sirens were 90 seconds away, maybe less. Cora stood motionless, watching the lights through the window. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small black remote. I took a step forward. Cora raised the remote. 1 more step, she said, and I pressed this button. I stopped. Brock tensed beside me. His hand moved toward his phone, then stopped, waiting. You won't, I said. Try me, Cora replied. We stood at opposite ends of the hallway, 10 feet between us. 35 years of marriage compressed into 10 feet of fluorescent-lit corridor. She held the remote steady. Her finger rested on the button, not pressing, not threatening, just waiting. I looked at the device in her hand, the same device I'd swapped at midnight in her Mercedes. The GPS transmitter disguised as whatever weapon she'd believed she was carrying. She didn't know it was fake. She truly believed she held leverage, which meant I could control exactly how long this standoff lasted. Yes, what does that button do? I asked. Cora smiled. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone showing their cards because they thought the game was already won. Failsafe, she said. Data wipe. 1 button and every file on those servers is overwritten 40 times. Unrecoverable. Every piece of evidence you just copied becomes meaningless because the source is gone. You destroy Orion, I said. $20 million. Years of work. I'd destroy the evidence, Cora corrected. The money's already in escrow. The buyer gets nothing, but neither does the FBI. And without evidence, you're just a man who broke into his wife's office building and made wild accusations. Brock shifted his weight. I felt him calculating the distance, whether he could reach her before she pressed the button. Don't, I said quietly without looking at him. He stayed still. The sirens were closer now, maybe 60 seconds. Give me the drive, Cora said. The encrypted drive you're carrying. Give it to me and I'll let you both walk out before the FBI arrives. You disappear. I tell them it was a false alarm. Everyone goes home. You'd let us go, I said, not a question, a statement of disbelief. I'd let you run, Cora said, which is more than you deserve. But I'm pragmatic. The drive for your freedom, that's the deal. I looked at my wife, this woman I'd loved, this stranger I'd married. Why did you keep all those tapes? I asked. 35 years of surveillance. Why not delete them? Why risk having that evidence exist? Cora's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted, just slightly. Because I said I would destroy you, she said. And I needed proof I kept my word. Proof for who? For myself, Cora said. 36 years ago, I had 6 years of work stolen from me. 6 years of my life erased like it never mattered. I promised myself I would never be powerless like that again. I promised I would build something they couldn't take. And I promised that anyone who tried to stop me would regret it. The HVAC system shut off. Complete silence. Just our breathing. Just the distant sirens getting closer. It's so you kept recordings of everything, I said, as proof you were keeping your promise to yourself. Yes. Even though those recordings are now proof against you, I said. Evidence of conspiracy, of fraud, of attempted murder. You kept proof of your own crimes because you needed to prove to yourself that you'd succeeded. Cora's hand tightened on the remote. Give me the drive, she repeated. No, I said. Then I pressed the button. Go ahead. We looked at each other. The silence stretched. Cora's finger moved toward the button, not pressing, hovering. You won't, I said again. Why not? Because you spent 10 years building Orion, I said. You're not going to destroy it over one drive. You're going to negotiate. You're going to offer me something else, something you think I want more than evidence. Cora lowered the remote slightly, not putting it away, just lowering it. You always were smarter than you pretended to be, she said. I learned from you. The sirens were loud now, maybe 30 seconds away. What do you want? Cora asked. It's the truth, I said, just once. The truth. About what? About us, I said. 35 years. Was any of it real? Cora looked at me for a long moment. The first year was real, she said finally. Maybe the first 2. After that it was comfortable, and comfortable is close enough to real that most people never know the difference. I felt something break inside my chest, not my heart, something deeper, the foundation I'd built my life on. Close enough, I repeated. It's more than most people get, Cora said. Something crossed her face that I'd seen only once before, the night Brock left for college, standing in the driveway watching his car disappear. Something she'd buried quickly then, and buried even faster now. 35 years, and I'd never seen my wife cry until now. Tears ran down her face. Not sobs, not drama, just tears. Silent, almost invisible in the fluorescent light. I'm sorry, she said. For what it's worth, I didn't want to hurt you. I just wanted to win. You hurt me anyway, I said. I know. Brock moved, not toward Cora, just shifted. And I saw Cora's eyes drop to his hand, to his phone, screen glowing in his palm, recording, had been recording this entire conversation. Cora's face changed, not anger, not betrayal, calculation. Her tears stopped as suddenly as they had started. Her expression shifted back to the professional mask I'd seen 1,000 times in business meetings. How long? She asked Brock. Since the lights came on, Brock said. Cora looked at the phone, looked at me, looked at the window where red and blue lights were now visible in the parking lot below. Well played, she said. Then she smiled, and I knew that smile. It was the smile of someone who just realized they'd been outmaneuvered, but had already moved 3 pieces ahead on a board no one else could see. She was already calculating her next move. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 35 years believing I knew the person sleeping beside me. I ignored the quiet signs, the small inconsistencies, because I wanted to believe in the life we'd built together. Don't make my mistake. When something feels wrong, trust that instinct. Family betrayal doesn't announce itself with warning signs, it hides in the ordinary moments you choose not to question. The hardest lesson wasn't about the family betrayal itself, it was about what came after. I could have spent years consumed by anger, tracking Cora's every detail, reliving her lies. But God put me through this for a reason, and I believe that reason was to teach me what freedom truly looks like. Freedom isn't revenge. It's sitting on your balcony with coffee, not needing to know what the person who hurt you is doing. Family betrayal taught me that holding on to anger is just another prison, and I'd been a prisoner long enough. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find your way forward? And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it with them. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to Revenge. Dad, every story here carries a lesson worth holding on to. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. As a final note, some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling and to protect privacy, but the core message about trust betrayal and choosing freedom remains true.